apologize, you can hear me, right? I see, okay.
If I move closer to you, would it cause interference? Is this for a reason? Can I move closer to you and hear live on stage and everybody can get you?
All right. Give first is when you're willing to put energy into a system without defining upfront what you're going to get. It's not philanthropy. It's not altruism. You expect to get something back. You just don't know when, from whom, in what form, over what time frame, and in what consideration. Pretty close?
I basically nailed it. Yeah. Without defining transactional parameters. It was the...
Okay, so I'll have to second that. Now, there's an important part of this, and it's interesting, as I get a lot of positive feedback, but I also get some negative feedback on everything I do all over the place, wherever. And the negative feedback, some of it is interesting, a lot of it is tiresome, especially when it's repetitive or agenda-based. But one of the interesting things, that negative feedback that I've gotten over years around Give First, that's caused me to define something very carefully, is that it's a philosophy, not a religion. And you'll hear me say different versions of this. I'll give an example. Somebody will come up to me and say, Brad, that's not Give First behavior. Or, oh, you're the Give First guy, why don't you give me $5 million? Or, I'm dealing, with different flavors of this in different places where people are trying to understand what I really mean by it. And what I mean by it is not, here are a set of rules, and if you follow these rules, good things will happen. And a religion, independent of what your religious tradition, generally is, if you follow these rules, you will achieve salvation. Or maybe you won't, and then you'll get reincarnated and get to follow the rules again to try to achieve reincarnation, at which point you won't, and, over and over again. A philosophy is not about following a set of rules. It's about incorporating an idea into what you do. It also doesn't mean, A, that you have to do everything that way, that you're going to be perfect, and that when you screw up and don't follow those rules, you're bad. So it's very interesting, trying to separate out this notion of, it's not even a belief system, it's just a set of cultural norms to try to aspire to, against the backdrop of recognizing that we're all just humans.
And what caused you to decide now is the time to write a book about this? Because I feel like I've heard you talk about this philosophy for at least a decade.
Yeah, so I started writing this book about 3 years ago, maybe even a little longer. It was during COVID somewhere. This is my 9th book. I was thinking that I was going to write my last nonfiction book. I was kind of getting tired of writing nonfiction books. I had done a second edition of Startup Worlds, and every time I have co-authors, I have the same experience, which is I'm excited about the collaborative activity, and then all of a sudden the reality of the work for them and for me becomes a part of it. I had breakfast with Sean Weiss, who wrote a book with me called Startup. I'm starting to have the same feeling, like getting done with a book and feeling good about it was getting hard. It was hard. It just was always difficult. So I'm going to write this last book. It's going to be my last nonfiction book. I want to write about Give First. I've been talking about this idea for a long time. I've been talking about mentorship for a long time. I've learned a ton of effective and ineffective mentorship techniques from Techstars and from many other things that I've done in life. And it's not that there's a way to be a great mentor, but there's a bunch of things that can help someone be more effective. And I just felt like, yeah, that's the book I want to end on. I want to get this out. And then maybe I'll write some science fiction. Maybe I'll start a podcast with somebody and do these super deep dives on iconic companies. So I started writing it, and I wrote a first draft. And my writing process is pretty chaotic. I try to get a couple hours a day in the morning, but I'm not consistent every day. I'm not, go in a special space. I just open my laptop and writing mode. And then once I get a draft done, that's in the words of Reid Hoffman, a shitty first draft, something that's just good enough to get out into the world. I always send it out into the world. And I generally send it to 20 to 30 people. I get a lot of feedback. I give everybody their own Google Doc to just do whatever they want. It's a shared Google Doc for everybody, so you see what other people are commenting. It's not like you get your own, please give me your own comments. And I got, a couple of their comments back. And then lots of people will comment to the doc, or send a separate email, which I then paste and put in the doc. I had a lot of work to do. When I distilled the feedback out, it was two things. One, you jam two ideas together. Those books, the front of the book goes one way, and then you flip it over, and it's got an upside down and backward cover. There's actually a really fun book by, I forgot her name, Courtney something, called Mobius. It's out right, just came out. That's one of those books, two books in one. That's what this was.
It was a perfect name for a book.
It is, isn't it? I jammed together the idea of Give First and the idea of mentorship. That was problem number one. Problem two was too much Techstars, not enough Brad. And I didn't want to write a memoir. That wasn't my goal. But my feedback was, all right, I got it. I got a bunch of stories, but the stories don't connect to anything. They don't mean anything, whatever. So I've got to do these two things. I knew how to do both of those things, but it was a lot of work. At the same time, I was starting to become, I'm not ever sure I have the right adjective for it, but I'll say unhappy with the direction of Techstars. I wasn't unhappy, I was becoming unhappy. And I was starting to feel like Give First was much more marketing than it was value system in lots of places. I felt it pretty deeply. I know David Cohen felt it pretty deeply. And there are lots of people within Techstars that felt it pretty deeply, but I felt like it was becoming not something that was enduring in how things felt. So I just didn't feel good about all this. And on top of it, I was pretty tired. I was pretty tired of the world. Middle of COVID was hard at lots of levels. I was getting tired of the venture world and sort of venture dynamics. And so I was sort of in this not super great headspace to drive to finish with a thing that I felt like I really wanted to do well and have it be what I want, sort of describe my value. So I put it on the shelf, and I stuck it on the shelf for about 2 years. And it's kind of fun to try to figure out how to stick something on the shelf when it's virtual. You delete all of the things. You still have it, but you delete all of the bookmarks to it in Chrome, and it's really hard to get something out of your recents and Drive if you've been working on it a lot. I mean,
it's really hard to figure out how recents and Drive works.
It really wants that shit at the top. You get the idea. When David Cohen came back as CEO of Techstars last fall, I had done one other thing. So corresponding with this, I just stopped being public. I didn't write that annoying blog post or LinkedIn post. Hi, I've decided that this is my last blog post for a while. I'm going to go on vacation for blogging or whatever. I just stopped. And I did it for me. I was just tired, bored, uninterested, didn't feel like engaging that way anymore. And I had a lot of work because now the tech downturn is in full blossom. It's a real thing.
It's second half of 22.
Yeah.
Early 23.
Yeah, that time frame. I mean, stuff's getting pretty screwed up.
Yep.
I got plenty of problems in my world, in my portfolio. There's lots of stresses. We had just raised a new fund, which we closed in the spring of 2023.
This is before everything became rah-rah about AI, but
right
after the interest rate hike.
That's right. There's this dip that was like this, and we're in the midst of this thing. And I'm getting older. I'm about to turn 60, and so I'm starting to feel it in different ways, in terms of what I'm interested in, how I want to spend my time, etc. So I now refer to it as hibernating. So I hibernated for 2 years. No social media.
Consuming but not posting? Or
Nothing.
Not consuming?
Didn't consume either. No consuming, no posting. The only thing I read that was tech information was the daily email for TechLean. It's the only thing I read. Other things showed up occasionally. Somebody would text me something, or I'd get something in email somewhere. No news. Not reading the, pick your favorite mainstream media thing. I never watched TV news anyway. So I just sort of allowed myself to have this space to reset on a bunch of stuff. I describe that now as having gone into hibernation. For those of you that, there's some people here that know me well and that have worked with me. I was very active with my work. I just didn't have a public profile. And that was an enormous relief after 30 years of being very visible, very open, good and bad, things that are going on, sort of not just, and here's how VC works, and isn't it awesome, and look at my beautiful house, and what's the Talking Heads song? My beautiful wife, and my beautiful, right? It's just like, it's all bullshit, right? I wasn't unhappy, I wasn't depressed, but I just needed a reset. In that, again, when David Cohen came back as CEO about a year ago, I told him that I would help him in any way he wanted. I was still in Techstars board through all this. I'll help him in any way he wanted, with anything, but I didn't want to be public. I didn't want to have a public profile. I was just going to continue, focus on where I could with my network, with anything. And, he and I would talk almost every day and sort of very deeply engaged in a bunch of things as we tried to reset some of the stuff that had been going on that was not being very effective or was hurtful or didn't work well. And I took the book off the shelf. I told Amy, I want to go look at the book again. And she kind of said, "Are you sure?" And she's my great protector when I do stupid things. And I said, "Yeah." And she looked at it too. Her feedback to me was positive, but I read through it. I'm like, there's good stuff in here. Like, if I put the effort into this thing, it'll be worth it. And so I did. So I spent 6 months. I worked hard on it from mid-year last year till the end of last year. And at the holidays, I felt like I had a good book finally. And as I started to work on going from, near final draft to publisher draft to edited draft to copy-edited draft. Anybody who's written a book, there's like...
It's actually a pretty fast process. That was holidays last year, and then within 5-6 months, that book
It was very fast, and I attribute that to the publisher I worked with on this book, which is Idea Press. Most books take 12 to 18 months from the time that you submit a draft to the publisher. I worked with Wiley.
Isn't that amazing? Like, how is any book ever relevant if it comes out?
It's weird, isn't it?
Months after you
It's weird.
It. Luck. It's some of these people that correctly predict where society is going to go, and then have the perfect book at the perfect time.
Yeah, that's called luck. This was interesting. The last piece of this, the publisher I use does 12 books a year, and they pick their 12 authors. So it's very the CEO Rohit is a very small indie group. I had worked with one other indie publisher. Before that, I worked with Wiley for the other 7 books. This is 100 times better than any experience I've had. It's the very first time I had physical books in my hand before Amazon had them. And I had them over 30 days, maybe almost 45 days before the first sale date, which was crazy. Like, it never happens that you actually can get the book out into the world before all of a sudden the publisher. Anyway, so when I started thinking about what I wanted to do with it, okay, now I've written this thing. I kind of felt it would be dumb to just publish it and not put any energy into being out in the world and reconnecting with people and talking about it and, trying to sort of get the ideas of this philosophy to the extent that they can be established in a substantive long-term way done. So I decided to come out of hibernation very deliberately, and I'm going to turn into a pumpkin on October 31st, just because I like to mix metaphors. I turned 60 on December 1st. I'm going to turn into a pumpkin, and same thing, just turn it all off, continue to work, But I haven't decided whether whether I would continue to write publicly or not. I haven't decided that. I probably won't. But sort of this period of time of engaging and talking to people and really being part of the ethos of what's going on, I decided to time limit deliberately, because I was worried about if I didn't, I would find myself where I was before, which was not really enjoying it.
How do you think tech media's change plays into this? Because to me, the 2010s of coming up as a startup person was reading Fred Wilson. It was like someone was pulling back the wool, this secrets that had been around the venture industry, and you were like, fuck it, I'm just going to tell people about what I'm doing, and more people will start companies if I do. And now there is a mass abundance of startup content everywhere you look. Do you think these two things are related?
Yes. My moment that I started to first feel a little bit uninterested in this. I started writing every day about this stuff in 2004. So it wasn't 2010, it was much earlier. In fact, Venture Deals was 30 or the seed corn of it was 30 or so blog posts that I did with Jason Mendelson on Feld.com in 2005 and 2006. And that only represents we wrote them all, and it only represents about 5% of the book. But it was a start for it. I don't remember when it was, but it was early teens, like 2012, 2013. All of a sudden, every venture firm of any substance was hiring a marketing person, and many of those marketing people that they were hiring, and marketing might not have been the right content person, and many of those content people were ex-journalists. And so all of a sudden you have all these journalists who are writing for venture funds, but they're not writing under their bylines. Their bylines are the partners' bylines. So now you have all of this kind of quasi-marketing shit being written under the guise of thought leadership by VCs.
Whereas yours really was, you're fired up about something, you leave a
I
meeting.
just sat down in the morning and wrote
3 paragraphs, published.
And I think for me, I know Fred well, so I can speak for Fred. For us, it was thinking out loud. It was not trying to generate deal flow. It was not trying to create a personal brand. It was not trying to, convince people of a position. I think we also did have different motivations. I think he enjoyed the conversations more and the back and forth more than I did. I liked the one-on-one back and forth. I liked when somebody would reach out to me and we'd develop a relationship from that versus like a thing that became a big meme that people talked about. That was less interesting to me. But again, 2013, 2014, that happened. Then another one that became uninteresting for me, and it was kind of the beginning of the end of my Twitter career, was VC Twitter. And, having been on Twitter for a long time, well before it became the thing that it is today, there were a lot of communities on Twitter. There was a lot of feedback. There were a lot of people, you knew their handles and you interacted with them. And it wasn't a bunch of DMing, but it was back and forth on different things that were quick and fun and interesting and challenging and different. And you learned stuff from them. And then all of a sudden it became a bunch of people trying to show how smart they were. And then it became a bunch of people bloviating about things.
And then trying to dunk on each other when you bloviated incorrectly.
That's correct. Oh, well, you're not part of the club anymore because you said this thing that my club over here, and now here's a bunch of people in my club that are going to come over and tell you how stupid you are. Like, that wasn't interesting because I wasn't learning, because the value for me was learning. The value was not, I used to give this talk and people would say, it's blah, 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 it's great to have you here. And I'd say, it's really delightful to be here. If I learn one thing from this talk, like I say something and it causes me to think about something new, then this was successful for me. And for y'all, I don't actually care what happens. which kind of was the way my brain worked. It wasn't
like
that
selfish altruism.
Yeah, I wasn't uncaring really, but like my filter was not, I'm not doing this for you. I'm not trying to. I mean, now this will sound both arrogant and disingenuous, so I'm censoring myself as I say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm not doing this for y'all, right? If anybody thinks I'm doing this because I'm trying to make money selling a book, no. I mean, that's not an economic proposition that makes any sense. Am I trying to get an idea out into the world? Yeah. Am I trying to get people to think about it, talk about it, do something about something I think is important? Yeah. But really, for me, the satisfaction comes from learning, and a lot of learning will be somebody that I don't know here will connect with me about something that I have no idea what it is, and that will be valuable to me in some way that I have no idea what it's going to be. Yeah. And I've been doing that for as long as I can remember as an adult, and the stuff that's come from that, I'm looking at Isaac. I mean, I don't even know how we connected, but it was...
You were an angel investor.
No, but it was Feld. But how did we... Through Warren. So one of my best friends said, hey, there's this guy, Isaac. You should meet him and his brother Saul, who's, way better looking than him and smarter and much taller. And I'm like, cool, whatever. And, I think probably the first time we met was at some Silicon Graphics thing somewhere. Right? I'm like, well, this is cool.
Right, that really takes you back.
Right? But that's the point. Like, you do these things, you just don't know where they're going to lead. And they lead to... For me, they've always led to learning and lifelong experiences. So that was kind of the arc of this book getting written. And at this stage now, I'll just end with this. I do think this is probably my last nonfiction book. I'm bored of it. I love to read science fiction. I love to read. Amy and I are crime, thriller, long series readers. So anybody that's like, do people know Joe Pickett? Anybody know Joe Pickett? He's a game warden in Wyoming. Yes. 25 or 26 books later, he's now a 55-year-old game warden in Wyoming versus a rookie game warden in Wyoming with like 3 grown kids. That's fun. So anyway, we'll see where that goes.
All right, I'm going to bring it back to tech and startups and entrepreneurship. A topic in the book that you hit several times is the dot-com era. A lot of the lessons sort of come out of that when you first sort of were woken up to some of these principles. Since early 23, we have been in boom times. There was that rough period you talked about, but especially if anything you does rhymes with AI, it's the late 90s all over again. In what ways... I wasn't a participant in the tech ecosystem in the late 90s, you were. In what ways is this current time similar, and in what ways is it different?
A similarity is the complete and total suspension of disbelief. It is a skill that as humans we are extraordinary at. It is really unreal how good we are doing at suspending disbelief. And it doesn't matter what history is and how much people study it and how many lessons there are from it. We just keep repeating the same suspension of disbelief. Now, the absolutely fascinating thing about the tech industry is that we're still on an incredibly steep, upward sloping innovation curve, unlike many other industries. Although, interestingly, if you dig deep enough into different things and you have a long enough view, you could say, for example, that the Industrial Revolution continues in the way that people think about manufacturing things. I'm an investor in a handful of 3D printing companies, and I've had a lot of experience, both good and bad, around that segment. But if you think about the manufacture of stuff, that has continued to evolve quite dramatically, but just in a different way and different cadence. And you might say, oh, well, that's tech. But is it? Really? Maybe?
Well, technology is anything that increases the productivity of humans. If you really...
Well, what if you don't need any humans?
I suppose listen,
Now,
if you-
let's talk
if you
about the.
humans to accomplish.
No, but
something.
isn't the trendy thing right now the AI company that only has one employee?
Sure, but that's increasing the productivity of human.
That's right.
I mean, someone that creates $100
You
million
said
of
humans.
revenue.
No,
But AI is not starting a company.
You said plural.
Okay, fair.
I'm just fucking with it. No,
Technology is a lever. It's a deflationary force.
It is a very powerful lever. And so if you go back 200 years, technology was a very powerful lever there. And technology is continuing to be a lever in many of those things. So to the what rhymes with .com, the thing people forget about .com is that even more money was lost in broadband. So there are these two bubbles that happened at the same time. The one we all talk about, which is the .com bubble, but then the real big bubble that Malik wrote a fantastic book about around that time called
the laying of all the fiber that never got lit up.
Well, that's now lit up, and then now there is everywhere. But there was a period of time where the amount of dollars blown up on that was extraordinary. There's a really good book. A Boulder friend of mine who has built. What do you think the largest fiber company in the world is?
Comcast?
Lumen, Comcast. Zayo wins. Who said Zayo? What do you know about Zayo?
We had dinner with the CEO of the
Okay, Dan Caruso was the founder of Zayo. He lives in Boulder. He wrote a great book if people are interested in how this runs, this specific question. The book came out 6 months ago.
What's it
It's
called?
called Bandwidth by Dan Caruso. And what Dan does is it's a history book. And a lot of Dan was in the middle of the history and was very successful in the middle of that history. He was at MFS, which got bought by WorldCom, which was famous for the CEO who didn't know anything other than how to be a school teacher, who eventually went to jail for being fraudulent.
That was like that and Enron were the two big.
Those are two big ones of about several hundred lawyers in the room. Craig probably remembers more. And then he started Level 3, which is now, what was the Lumen. Level 3 is now part of Lumen. And then Zayo. And Zayo today is still very, very large. It's now private, went public, private again. But these two bubbles were happening at the same time. And there's a rhyme here, right? We're building really gigantic energy, data center, infrastructure stuff. A cynical person would say that there will be a big overbuild. CapEx for these types of things are different than they were before because of the way the infrastructure gets built out, including the way the contracts work. My guess is a lot of these contracts are going to be more cancelable than they were the last time around because people got smarter on the build side. So, is Microsoft going to spend $80 billion this year and $160 billion next year and $320 billion the year after on physical infrastructure for AI?
I knew the 80. Are they forecasting?
No. But
Okay, yeah, probably not then. And if so, to your point, it's cancelable.
What happens when those curves change? What happens when all the NVIDIA chips that are being bought right now in several years need to be replaced? Or will they? So there's a lot of interesting problems in this because it's not just a sort of predictable curve, whatever the curve is. Same with energy, where I just saw an announcement today, Commonwealth Energy Systems signed a huge deal with Google to buy out 50% of all the energy from their first reactor, if and when that first reactor.
That's the nuclear.
Yeah, fusion reactor. Right, so it's fascinating, like the amount of things spinning around that so that nobody's confused. I believe I have zero, not like even a tiny bit, is zero predictive power around any of this.
So let's take that at face value. No predictive power, but you did go through all the awesomeness of the .com run-up and the pain caused afterwards. What has been internalized into your soul?
The slopes of those two curves are not equivalent. The slope of the run-up is this,
Yep.
which feels really, really fast. Let's take the logarithmic slope, because they really are kind of like curves like this.
Yep.
The logarithmic slope is like this,
Yep.
and the slope on the down is like this. Much steeper. And so when the pain happens, it's brutal. Along the way, you have a lot of perturbations that are confusing. You have a lot of things that feel right or don't. And I'll give one of my favorite examples. It's not in the book. Who remembers Palm? Who used a Palm? Who used a Windows CE device instead of a Palm? No.
You're in Seattle, so they may actually.
I know. Who had a Zune? Jeez, really? I had like five.
Who had a Windows phone?
I know. I had like five. I had like 5 different Zunes, but they all came from Microsoft events. So I go back to a time before there was such a thing as an online calendar. You don't have to go back that far. Did you ever have life before an online calendar?
Not an adult life.
Not an adult life. How many people here had adult life before an online calendar? You had a calendar on your computer, but you couldn't get to it unless you were on your computer. And the way you carried it around with you is you took one of those little Palm devices and stuck it in a thing that was connected to your computer, and it did this thing called syncing, right? We funded company number 17 of 30 making a web-based online calendar. The one we funded was called Any Day. And when I say we, I mean SoftBank. Back when I was part of SoftBank, which turned into Mobius. Now, we were the 17th. We might have been the 19th, I don't know, not precise. But there was a shit ton of these. Only 3 of them had positive financial outcomes. The one that Yahoo bought, the one that AOL bought, and the one that Palm bought, which happened to be Any Day. All the rest of them were zeros. Now, on that arc, here's how the Palm negotiation went. Palm offered us $100 million of Palm stock. And, you know,
Which at the time was probably pretty highly valued.
Yes. That's part of the punchline. You're supposed to be good at this.
Sorry.
$100 million of Palm stock. We're like, we want. We're like, you know what? Our stock is undervalued.
Of course, that's the pitch.
But we'll give you. Sorry, it was the other way around. $80 million of Palm stock. Our stock is undervalued. We'll give you $100 million of cash because we don't want to use our precious stock.
What is it, Warren Buffett over there?
Because our stock is so undervalued, and like we had, I think, the shortest board meeting you ever have, right? And somebody did say, well, you know, the stock might double. I remember I was young. I'm like, what the fuck are we talking about? Like, done. So we got our $100 million of cash. 1 year later, that $80 million of Palm stock was worth less than $1 million. Right? That's how sharp that curve is.
Okay, I'm going to ask Brad one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the room for questions for Brad, for me, or for both of us together.
But enjoy the suspension of disbelief as long as it lasts.
What's the Bill Gurley quote? You don't know when the end is coming, and so the only way to deal with that pain is to just enjoy every bit of the upside on the way up.
Yeah. That's exactly correct. Never mind what negative impact on the way down, though. That's part of the thing I think that's challenging here is maybe one other thing that rhymes before we go to the last question. I wrote a blog post this morning. I'm having fun basically just torturing the AI as best as I can, so I just think about what questions I can ask them to amuse me. And I mostly am driven off of things that are annoying me. And what's really annoying me is how much we are anthropomorphizing this thing. This thing is just software. That's it. Software. There are 1,000 state-level AI regulatory bills in process to regulate things that are already regulated under software and systems that a new law does not need to exist for any of these things because they already exist. Do people break the existing laws? Yes, they do break the existing laws. Does our legal system deal with that? Sort of, maybe. Better than most countries, yes. But this whole idea, like if you think of somebody not in tech and talk to them about what an AI is, they believe that what they type into the prompt, what comes back, is truth. They believe it's a thing that's actually reasoned through the question and is giving them an answer that is factually correct.
Well, it depends if they're pulling from MCP servers and if there's like search grounding, and it wasn't true of 2022 November ChatGPT, but it's truer today, depending on
It's truer, but there's an awful lot of stuff you can ask. You can ask ChatGPT, or you can ask Claude, or you can ask Gemini very quickly, and by just prodding them a little can get them very quickly to own up that the thing that they told you the first time wasn't actually really correct. Maybe it was sort of correct. And then you can get it to tell you that maybe that thing isn't even that correct. It's still sort of correct, but there's some other things. And it's very, Brad, it's a very nuanced question that you're asking me. And the point is not that these are bad things. They're very interesting. But the anthropomorphization of them is extraordinarily, it's just so extreme. And the extrapolation of where it goes, of which I'm a novice in the debate, I'm not going to even engage in the debate because there's people on both sides of that debate. From one end it's going to exterminate our species, and at the other end it's going to be the greatest thing ever. I have no idea. But are back in this notion of suspension of disbelief, the inability for us to separate the marketing bullshit from the critical thinking about what the thing and how the thing works is pretty bad right now. And that was the case in 1999 and 2000. Many of the assertions had, over a long arc of time, lots of validity. And the way that they impacted society had lots of truth, or, lots of efficacy. But the time frames were wrong, the impacts were wrong, the second order effects were different. The things that then resulted in terms of what people predicted would be good things that would happen across all broad swaths of society then didn't, were unchanged. So I think it's, if there was anything that would be parallel warning, is put a little more critical thinking against what the not desired path, that's the wrong word. Critical thinking against what's actually happening and how that translates to where the outcome is going to be, against the backdrop of we all make lots of mistakes. Like, that's the essence of being a founder. That's the essence of creating new things. Like, you have a hypothesis, you test it, it fails, you try it again. You change your hypothesis, you test it, it fails. Eventually it works, you do a lot more of it. I mean, the interview you did with Steve Ballmer was great with the reflection. He's like, with hindsight, I totally screwed this up, but I totally got this right.
Yep.
And what you got right far outweighed what you screwed up.
I mean, to take your exit path here, the Steve Ballmer reflection is quite interesting and profound. Everyone always thinks that in startups everything is power law distributed. Yeah. These venture capital investors make investments. 20 investments in a portfolio, 1 or 2 is the return driver, you'll get money back on 5 and the rest go to 0, something like that. Your partners have done amazing blog posts about this. The most interesting thing is that is true for the largest companies in the world also. Microsoft made a ton of bets and most of them failed. The Xbox is like kind of the middling one that's more than return capital but it hasn't been crazy, but Zune and all these consumer bets. They bet on becoming an enterprise company and being able to sell to the enterprise, and they bet on cloud. And everything else, all the bungled acquisitions, Skype and Nokia, and completely failing in mobile, and Aquantive, and all the write-downs, doesn't matter. Completely fine, completely masked by the multi-$100 billion revenue successes of those other 2 initiatives. And it's crazy. The whole world at every scale is power law driven, not just early stage startups.
Well, I'll go a step further and say reflect on one's life. I know lots of people who publicly try to assert that they don't make any mistakes. There are some leaders who think that great leadership is to deflect, to always avoid, to make sure the mistakes are somebody else's. You think about your own life. I mean, the number of mistakes that I've made on an absolute basis, just count mistakes versus count not mistakes. My bet is count mistakes is much greater than count not mistakes. But when I have a not mistake and then I latch onto it.
Right, it's about bet sizing.
Oh, like I'm going to do a lot of that not mistake. I mean, I've been married twice. My first marriage was a mistake. And it only consumed 3 years of my life. My not mistake version of that consumed 32 years of my life and is many, 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 many orders of magnitude better than mistake.
And shapes you and continues to shape you.
That's right.
All right, my last question before we go to folks in the audience is, it's my favorite sort of closing interview question recently. What is something that you used to believe to be true, that you were 100% convinced of, call it 2-3 years ago, where you've done a complete 180 and you now believe the opposite?
Only 2-3 years.
Because otherwise it's easy. But what if you really changed your mind on in the last few years? Probably should have given him a heads up. But I was
No, I really like this question. I have a lot of quippy ones, but the quippy ones are not profound.
Start with a quippy one to buy yourself time, and then...
No, I like to sit. I'm very comfortable with the awkward pause. I thought, even 3 years ago, I thought there were more people in our industry that actually cared about the idea of a positive sum experience. I mean, we live in tech is competitive and companies are competitive and people are competitive with each other. But, even going back to when I was running my first company, I think the word cooperative was kind of the word back then, where you sort of competed, but you cooperated. And I think even 3 or 4 years ago, I felt like there was within tech industry broadly writ, the investing community, at least in the United States, broadly writ. I felt that there was much more of a sense of long-term, multi-turn, positive sum outcomes versus short-term, single-turn, win-lose, zero-sum type things. I separate that from disappointments, failure, sadness, like all of those things are part of the experience. Failure, of course, in the world of tech is a huge part of it, whether it's gigantic companies having bets that don't work or startups that fail. But the idea that there was a sense of a longer-term, aligned sense of purpose. And I think a lot of it came from my own view of startup communities and how startup communities work. And by the way, I still think there's a lot of it. But I'm surprised, I've flipped on the way I think about how leaders approach it. And I think the leaders are approaching it in much more tribal ways, much more my tribe is going to win over your tribe. In the U.S. we have, do you wear a red jersey? Do you wear a blue jersey? I'm in Seattle. My guess is most people are wearing blue jerseys, although you never know anymore. In terms of the dynamics of whatever audience you happen to be in. But the tribalism is so extreme. And you can kind of see it happening in all of our society, but I didn't feel it as much within tech more broadly. And so that's a flip for me, and I think that's actually quite destructive. It's not idealistic to not have that, but I think it's destructive because it changes the way people think about what's good or bad, what's success or failure, how to build and develop relationships. There's a word that's very positive in my, or not positive word, but very prevalent in my world, which is grin fucking. I learned it in the 90s from an investment banker, and it's, the person that
It's literally exactly like it sounds.
Yeah,
We've all had those meetings.
right? Yeah, everybody has had that meeting. There's so much of it. So much just disingenuous bullshit. And there always has been. That's okay. But the magnitude of it surprises me now. I don't know if that was profound, but that was not quippy.
All right.
I'll give you a quippy one, though, that goes longer. I said for a long time that this is it. You can kind of get one chance. I'm Jewish. I grew up in Dallas. There were 4 Jewish kids in a high school of 2,000, so I sort of had that experience of it, having weird holidays. And
I had the exact same thing in Northeast Ohio.
You get it, right? It's like, well, you're a little weird. And then as I went to college, I went to MIT. I became an atheist. I think probably 50% of the people at MIT are atheists because science encounters religion not very gracefully at 3 o'clock in the morning when you had too much to drink or you're a little stoned. And on that went. And so for a long time, I was sort of saying, this is it. This is the one shot. This is our experience. And, I've been very open about my own ups and downs with mental health and, getting my own mind around what mattered to me. And I went through a period after I got very depressed now a dozen years ago where I started to feel like maybe I was bullshitting myself. Like, I would say I'm okay with that. Like, when lights go out, am I okay with that? Amy and I would have this entertaining argument about, do you want to live forever? And we'd both be like, we're going to be done sick of humans by the time we hit 100. Want to have a nice, long, healthy life, but then one day it's going to be over. But then I went through this. Was I actually bullshitting myself? And I spent a lot of time in therapy, but also with Amy and just sort of working through that. And I came all the way around to not changing my mind on that, right? So that was like a maybe 180 that didn't end up being a 180, but where I had to ask that question and really think hard about it. And the reason it's relevant in this time frame is the 2-year break from all things public was really helpful in that. Because I sort of wandered into it. This is the experience I'm having, and this is it. Is this what I want? And, I can say comfortably, universally, yes. Like, this is, I'm loving the experience of being alive on this planet right now, and I'm going to be okay when it's over, whatever that means.
Haunting. And inspiring, but haunting. All right, questions from the audience, and we'll repeat them, Brad, because for the recording.
Okay. So first off, I run product for a tribute company. I can tell you that AI is confidently wrong all the time. But going back to your definition of Give First, so you find it as a system, like you started out with. Can you give a concrete example of how you employ that system or how you put that system into motion when the need arises?
Yeah, so the question is, can I give examples of how I put Give First into motion? I'll give a couple. And then maybe I'll give a couple of counterexamples too. It's a story in the book, but the experience of founding Techstars is an example of this. I used to, on a monthly basis, do a thing I call random days. I was at this point in Boulder, by the time I started doing this in my post-internet bubble, 2004, 2005, I was literally getting inbound multiple times a day. Can you get together for coffee? Can you get together for a meal? I'm coming to Boulder, I'm coming through Boulder, so-and-so said I had to get together. And so I just, like, if all I did was say yes to that stuff, all I do is have coffee. And I'm going to be very caffeinated. I'm also a default yes person versus default no, so my tendency will be to say yes to all that stuff. So I just decided that instead of doing that, and I would squeeze a call in here, a thing here, or this here, And the dissonance was too high. My brain was tired all the time. Like I couldn't focus on the things I need to focus on. And so what I started doing was I said, look, I have random day. There's my online calendar. I actually wrote a little online calendaring thing. And it would take 2 or 3 months to get on the calendar. I would do 15-minute meetings. I used to have a kitchen timer. Eventually, I turned it into an iPhone timer. I said, next 15 minutes belong to you. What do you want to talk about? Well, whatever you want to talk about. Next 15 minutes belong to you. You wanted the meeting. Let's talk. Whatever. Eventually, so that I wouldn't feel frustrated that I was wasting a day, my goal was learn one thing, make one introduction. If I do that for every meeting, it was a good day. And sometimes I'd have a bunch of introductions, or I'd learn a couple of things in that 15 minutes.
That's a massive amount of value creation if you actually do that all day and have that happen for every meeting.
10, 15 meetings. And again, very geographically centered. This was in Boulder, so it was, again, creating a flywheel in the context of Boulder. Most of them were fun. I definitely had some days that I get done with. I'm like, why am I doing this? David came to one of those meetings. It took him about 3 months to get on my calendar. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. He knew of me, and we'd both been an angel investor in the same company. And I tell the whole story in the book, and I think everybody here is getting a book, so I'll let you read the story. But what came out of that day was Techstars got funded. And we the 4 of us that co-founded it, David Brown, Jared Polis, and me, started the thing. Another example of it that happens all the time, and this is not, I describe it as the inverse of networking. When I was, in the 1990s, when I was running my first company, there was this whole thing about networking. And the whole idea was you want to, network with other people. And the networking, hey Buzz, I met you, Buzz now meets me, we're now connected, and that's good. And I collected your business card, and you collected my business card, and then we're done. Which of course is not at all how you live your life. You're an anti-networker in the context of this definition. I found that incredibly unsatisfying as somebody in my 20s. And what I realized was I was having a hard time engaging with other people. I was collecting a lot of business cards, but I wasn't able to figure out how to actually engage. As I became older and more successful, what I decided was whenever somebody reached out to me, I would try to give them an opening to engage. So I'm sure there are people who are just, my email address is easy to find, so it's easy to send me a note. Lots of people, when they reach out, don't really know what to do. And so what I tried to start doing in the context of Give First was I would actually, when I get an email from someone I didn't know, I try to look them up and I try to figure out a thing that was a linkage to something that they were doing rather than the other way around. And then ultimately I started giving that advice to people, which is if you want to get a busy person's attention, instead of sending them a note saying, hey, I want your attention, pay attention to me, put a little work into figuring out something they care about, and then doing something around that that's helpful to them. And recognize that no one has an obligation to respond to you. So again, that mindset of changing that approach. The opposite is true though, which is I think the challenging thing for a lot of people when they come into contact with this idea, which is that this notion that it's an obligation. You have no obligation to me about anything. I can come up to you, we can exchange information. You still can ignore me for the rest of your life. You can still be operating in a give first mindset, but you have no obligation to do something for me. If you disappoint me and I say to you, hey, you've disappointed me, you don't have an obligation to engage. So it's trying to change the lens so that the person who is trying to engage that way is saying, I want to get something out of this, but I don't know what it's going to be. So as a result, I'm going to put some energy into it versus I'm going to tell the other person, hey, you must, or you should, or does that make sense?
Yeah, is that the non-transactional aspect to it?
That's right.
Thank you.
Let's see, I saw your hand first. The red shirt.
Thanks for the time and insights, guys. We are currently going through a paradigm shift in Silicon Valley, which hasn't been the first time. And I found that each of those seems to bring some kind of large scale unlock, whether that be like the internet era unlocking zero cost distribution, or the social era, which was able to recognize network effects. And I'm curious if you guys see, either as investors or tech historians or analysts, if there's any key unlocks that AI has been able to bring to the table that previous technology hasn't been able to access before.
That is like the question, I think, of this era. So thank you. The question is, the way I think about this is, I'll pitch it back in my framing. Every technology wave that is a big, meaningful, $1 trillion wave collapses some cost dimension of a business to zero or near zero. What dimension is that this time? And I think that's exactly right. With the internet was zero distribution costs. Software before the internet was zero marginal cost to replicate an additional copy of Microsoft Office and send it out. And the question is in AI, kind of what is it? There's a mirage that's happening where a lot of the big heavy costs of AI are currently being subsidized. So we kind of feel like there's this zero productivity cost. Wow, a single person developer can create something that creates $100 million of revenue. That may be a short-term thing. I feel like what we're paying per token right now as companies using AI is incredibly inexpensive. And the question is there going to be Moore's Law type things that keep it really inexpensive? And then the real answer will be like, oh my God, you can actually accomplish building very complex products with very small teams, and so you collapse a lot of the headcount to near zero? Or is it actually not that transformative and there's this huge hidden compute cost that, for this short window of time, none of us have to pay? I think that's kind of the question, is where is that going to land?
I'm going to come at it completely orthogonally with one specific example, which is the progression of the last 40 years, maybe 50 years, of how software is created. So my experience with writing software started with what were called third generation languages, or 3GLs. Programming languages like BASIC, Pascal, C. The languages prior, the 2GLs, and I'm not sure whether Fortran is classified as a 3GL, probably is. Algol was a 2GL, and then assembly language would be a 1GL. But my childhood was an Apple II computer, so I started to program with 3GLs. My first business, the phenomena was fourth generation languages. And these were not niche things. They were screen painters, where you defined on the screen what you wanted the screen to look like. Oracle had a thing on, like what it was called, it was so awful.
It was like Visual Basic.
And that was before that. These were still DOS-based screens, and you would, DOS-based environments, and you'd literally say name, and then you'd say 20 characters, and that was the name field. And then address 1, and then you'd have 20 characters address field. And by the time you got down to zip, you'd say 5 digits, but it had to be 5, it couldn't be 4. And those things would then connect to a database structure where you just define the database structure separately. And the database would be, here's the name field, and here's the address 1, and address 2. And those things would connect, and there'd be no programming. And your screen would come up, and all of a sudden the program would run. And these 4GLs, a bunch of them were called database languages. They were sort of the extrapolation of what was, FoxPro was probably a better example than Visual Basic of a 4GL. But there were a bunch called Data Flags. Clarion was the one that my first company used. And the 4GLs were going to replace programming. And then there was even this notion of 5GLs, which was kind of like a missing thing. There was a great book by a guy named Cusimano, MIT professor, Michael Cusimano, wrote about how Japan was going to take over technology and software development by making it a factory. And 5GLs were going to be the factory. That failed. That didn't work. So just delete 5GL from the lexicon. What happened was the web. And with the web, it essentially, instead of 4GLs becoming what everybody used, we created this incredibly complex stack for controlling a new type of application that wasn't limited to a single computer. And that evolved for many, many years. For somebody like me, like you could learn Python and you could learn the syntax of the language, but you couldn't do anything with it because all the tooling and the environment and the complexity and the deployment was way too complicated. And as these things like the cloud or AWS and Azure and GCP became routinized, the interfaces to all of them were different, depending on whether you used, React or Django. All of those frameworks were different. So there was this huge proliferation of stuff, but at the coding level. Then, maybe just before AI, this current iteration exploded, we had this phenomena that was no-code programming.
That's right.
And there was a whole bunch of VCs, including us, that funded companies that were no-code programming.
Isn't it funny how there's these like hot VC waves of like, what's your no-code strategy? And like some of these turn into like trillion-dollar waves, like AI.
And some of them
don't. Most
vaporized.
of them don't.
And no-code was one that kind of vaporized. It didn't go anywhere because it wasn't really any good. And then what happened, and somewhere, there was just a big cursor meetup here.
I think at PSL.
Yeah, I think PSL had the cursor meetup. Now what we have is, I think we've skipped over, and no code was kind of 6GL was what people were starting to try to call them. I think we just skipped over that. I think we're at 7GLs, which I think this technology that we're calling AI is ideally suited for building software without having to write code. And the language is vibe coding, and there's all kinds of pros and cons about it. But if you actually watch what's evolving very, very quickly, not just with how to use prompt language and system prompts and things like that, or MCPs, but just the ability, because you're dealing with a fairly constrained corpus of behavior with an enormously broad open source of implementation and tooling that can iterate on itself very, very quickly. I think what it does is it democratizes software development in a way that we've been trying for the last 30 or 40 years to do. And I think over the next 2 or 3 years, the number of things that are going to change in terms of how software is developed is going to be profound. I don't think that is, and there will be no more software developers. An aside, I ran into, I was in Toronto last week at a Golden Ventures thing, which is a fund that we're investors in. I don't know if people here know Matt Golden and that team, but they've done a bunch of cool stuff. And one of the companies is implementing a design version of Canva using AI prompts, but that's tightly integrated into the development environment. So as a non-designer, you can now design the same thing a designer would do in Canva, which Canva, of course, is saying, oh, here's your AI prompt, make it this, make it that. But then again, it's tightly integrated into the development environment, so you no longer have to have that bridge between designer and developer. I think a lot of those things are going to flatten. And the result is that the way we conceptualize software being built will change pretty dramatically.
Fascinating. All right, 2 more questions. Let's see. Go for it.
So, thinking back on that anthropomorphizing AI and how the non-technical audience doesn't understand, or assumes it's true, or actually I've seen a lot of just distrust of it altogether. How do you see bringing AI-powered capabilities to that audience? Like, what can we learn kind of from the .com era where you had this just transformation of all these industries, especially when you're building things for, in some cases, very non-technical audiences?
There's probably a bunch of metaphors that are useful here. The one that immediately comes...
Restate the question a little bit.
Oh, sorry. How do you get people who are not techies to not be scared of AI and to actually use it?
And learn from them, too. I think that's the big piece. Is
And how do techies learn from those non-techies?
Yeah.
So, how many people in this room are afraid to put a credit card into a web browser? Nobody. Do you know anybody that's still afraid to put a credit card into a web browser? Right? just as an example, like that metaphor immediately comes to mind, is this notion of, as an industry, the harm that gets created in the quest for success and dollars far outstrips that sort of very broad base of non-technical users. I think about crypto as a particularly interesting example here. The number of people who don't trust it because they don't know why, but something bad, and then the number of people who promote it, but who are fundamentally not trustworthy. Right? The intersection of that is pretty rough, and I think we run some of that risk. I shouldn't say we. I think the tech industry runs that risk collectively with AI. It's not, we just released a new model and it's sycophantic, and it's after 3 or 4 prompts it starts behaving in a way that's uncomfortable. You don't need 100,000 stories of people who became addicted to interacting with the chatbot and then committed suicide. We don't need that many of those stories. And so the idea, for example, that this is a substitute for true mental health, and the promulgation of what are now a huge number of chatbot-like mental health things that you can pay money for, that probably many of them are doing more harm than good because of addictive behavior or misdiagnosis or whatever they are, but where the promotion is still, this is really going to be good for you, this is going to be helpful. So I don't think we fix that problem. Like I don't know how to fix that problem. I don't know how to jump up and down and yell, hey everybody, like you don't have to over promote your bullshit. I think the other end of the spectrum is equally bad. I think we're going to have an enormous, unless something happens very quickly and AI regulation gets normalized in a rational way, which it might, but it has to happen really fast. I think we're going to have many years of legal chaos, especially around the intersection of labor and technology. And the legal chaos, my best example for it would be, if you think about the internet, if every state regulated the internet, we wouldn't have the internet. It just wouldn't exist in the United States.
It was one 1993 act that enabled, that legalized commercial activity that then created all internet businesses. And if the federal government didn't have the power to say, like, yep, commercial activity is legal, would have stayed academic forever.
That's right. And on top of that, there's a construct. Some people argue about net neutrality all the time, and the meaning of it has lost its meaning because of some of the federal law dynamics around it. But that was in that same time, which was the notion of not creating inappropriate gatekeepers for information that were paid tolls associated with it. So sort of separating what could you had to transport everything equally versus I'm a provider of content and I should be able to get paid for content. But same thing, it wasn't state by state. So I think those kinds of things, which right now are getting stirred up so fast and so quickly, and in the hyper-politicalized environment we're in, are really difficult. I fear that unless we get in front of that collectively, that will be a problem. The hyperbole that exists within the tech industry about what AI can do is making that worse, not better. Right? It makes people more afraid, not less afraid. And it's sort of like I feel this personally. I have 100 great situations where people feel like a thing I'm involved in was really helpful and additive, and then one where somebody feels like it was hurtful. Which one is the one that lingers? It's the one, not the 100.
Yeah, it's the one bad YouTube comment invalidates all that. In my world, it's like the one person that's like, you missed it on this episode, or like, wow, that was like a softball interview, or whatever the criticism of the moment is, it erases all the positive.
That's right. It doesn't matter, and look, you can have tough skin, you can have, or maybe not, right? Like, I think if you put that at a macro level, that's part of the problem with the hyperbole. And I saw an article yesterday somebody used a great word in the article, which was psyops, P-S-Y-O-P-S. I think the tech industry has mastered psyops. I think leaders use it endlessly.
In what way? Give me an example.
Misdirection. How many people remember the movie Swordfish? It actually holds up kind of good. It's kind of a bit one of John Travolta's better movies. And there's a scene in it where the Hugh Jackman character, who's the pathetic nerd that's getting played, they like drive down something and he's shooting guns at everybody. The John Travolta character shooting guns and things are blowing up everywhere, and somehow they survive. I think that Hugh Jackman's character's name is Sonny. And the guy, and he says to John Travolta, "How did you get through that?" And he says, "Misdirection." What do you mean? How did we not die? Misdirection. I was pointing over here, but we were going over there. And that's what I mean by it. There's an awful lot of statements that are made that, the press then tries to get under and amplify and understand. And nobody really totally knows what's going on. And then sort of the coding of everything around it is kind of just misdirection for what the real issue is. I'll tie it back to you. Like when I think about your interviews, part of what you're trying to do in your research is get past the misdirection. I just listened. Buzz sent me the link to the podcast that you just did with Guy Kawasaki.
Actually, Buzz introduced us.
And I listened to it on my way home from the airport. I had a 2-hour drive back from an airport the other day, and it was awesome. And like near the end of it, your comment was, you block all of the PR firms. You block anybody who's saying to you, "Will you interview me for this?" Or "I've got a great CEO for you," or "Boy, our company story is this," even for significant businesses, because that's not the story. That's the story they want you to tell, not the story. And I think that's part of this, is that we're getting fed the story they want us to hear rather than us digging for the story. Nothing new in the history of humanity. But I think in this moment it's particularly challenging because who was the person that said all the AI stuff? It was it's confidently wrong. Like with confidence, it's wrong. Well, my mother is getting the confidence, or she's afraid to put her credit card in the thing, and that's the problem, or a problem.
All right, we got one more question. Let's see, in the blue shirt.
So, with your comment before about kind of the change in tribalism, single term rather than multi-term relationships, how does that change how you assess companies and families?
Well, 30-something years ago when I made my first angel investment, I cared about two things: the person and the product. For the person, I wanted to have a sense of, whether I wanted to work with them, and the product, whether or not I cared about the product, or got the product, understood it. Today, I've extended it to three things. Thing number one: were you put on planet Earth to work on this problem right now? Doesn't have to be for the rest of your life, right now. Number two: do you want to be partners with me as much as I want to be partners with you? I'm okay missing stuff. I've missed a lot of stuff that made money. And I've invested. I've never met a VC who invested in a company who said, "This is a piece of shit, but I'm going to invest in it anyway." So on day one, you think you're investing in something that could be really successful, but as a VC investor, you have to be comfortable with the idea that you're going to be wrong most of the time. Most of those companies are not going to be successful. But do you want to work with me as much as I want to work with you? That's a key attribute, because I don't want to be invested in your company if you don't really care about me as your partner. There's plenty of VCs that don't want that relationship. For me, it's important. And then the last is, do I have affinity for what you're doing? Because I've invested in so many things that I don't care about. Every company I've ever been involved in, successful or not, has had at least one near-death experience, right? All the unsuccessful ones have died, so they've had at least one. All the successful ones have had at least one near-death experience, one where you look at it and you're like, this could be the end of this company. Even the ones that have gone on to enormous success, and many of them have had more than one of those. So my own experience is when you don't care about the thing that much that you're building, it's very hard to keep your head in it during that near-death experience, and that comes back to the first thing. If you weren't put on earth to work on this problem, when it gets really hard, are you going to keep your head in it, or are you going to move on to the next thing? So those are it for me. I think a mistake a lot of people make about investors in general and venture capitalists in specific is that it's a singular archetype. I wrote a post 15 years ago that VCs are Dungeons and Dragons characters, which just shows my age, although Dan Shapiro informed me that Dungeons and Dragons became trendy again. For younger people, they're Magic the Gathering characters or they're World of Warcraft characters. Like, they've all got different skill levels and attributes and strengths and experience points and that sort of thing. And so really, I think when you're understanding what the investor's looking for, a lot of it is understanding the investor, not the firm or not VC broadly.
I don't do as much investing these days, but it is crazy how every single thing has gotten politicized. Like, there's a new thing in the world, and it takes all of 6 hours before it's red team and blue team. And it's crazy watching like smart people form an opinion on something because they're feeling like, well, the community that I consider myself a part of thinks this about that thing. I mean, it's everything from like acts of war to like, do I wear a mask or not, to what did somebody say, that there's now some quote floating around on the cover of the New York Times. Oh, there's a quote. What do you think about the quote? And everybody needs to be like, gee, what does my team think about this before I'm willing to say my opinion on it? I have gained the thing I've changed my mind on in the last few years is I have a lot more respect for people who are kind of always willing to, in some ways it's like being a weenie and opting out of the question and being like, I don't know what I think yet. I know that I'm supposed to think like, oh, that gesture that person made was really bad, or oh, that act of war or not war or whatever is like really bad. But like, I just always assume that I don't have all the context, and that like there's maybe it's as clear cut as like that person was bad who did that thing. But I just feel like I'm probably not in the room where it happens, and no one else is either, and so I just don't have an opinion about nearly as many things as I used to, because it's all going to get lost in the noise of history. And how do I just like try to pay attention to things and work with and spend time with other people who also think, yeah, I probably don't know about this either, so what if I just sit this one out? And you should kind of keep sitting them out. And so the important stuff will level up.
I'll just put a wrap around that. I think that's really, really powerful and really well said. And it links to an important construct that I think is missing in a lot of different spaces that we're in now, which is the value of the combination of being an independent thinker, so being willing to think on your own. Some of it's due primary research, but some of it is also just sort of pause and think about a situation, combined with the idea that there's a lot of stuff that each of us doesn't know. So if you know something and really understand it and feel strongly about it, that's different than if you just feel strongly about something. And that's different yet again than if you're just reacting. And I do think, and maybe this is it, when you ask me like where did I change my mind on, I used to view a number of people as independent thinkers. And that set of people, the individuals that I used to think of as independent thinkers, I now view as having the 180 degree would not be simply that they're not independent thinkers, but that they're unable to be independent thinkers and acknowledge that they might not know what's going on.
It's a complex one to leave it on. But we will. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks to the Center of AI World.
Thanks to Yvonne and the AI2 team for hosting us.
Thank you guys.
And we should also, I think, I know Craig's here, Wilson Cincini underwrote a bunch of books for people. Thank you.
And Wilson Cincini for just all the great work you do in the startup ecosystem. Thanks a lot.
I have no idea where the books are, but I presume they're somewhere. Oh, they're on the way out. So please grab a book. And as a author who did put a lot of energy into this book, I have a few requests as we end. One, if you like it, make noise about it. However you want, whatever your noise is. Amazon and Goodreads likes reviews. The internet loves photos of people with books, all that stuff. If you don't like it, throw it away and don't tell anybody.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.